They called it the Chinese Century. For 3 decades, the world watched in awe as China transformed itself from a struggling developing nation into the world's manufacturing powerhouse. Skyscrapers rose from villages, container ships left Shanghai in endless streams, and the label Made in China became the defining mark of globalization. But what happens when the engine that powered the world starts to falter? What happens when the dragon begins to slow down? The story of China's economic collapse isn't sudden. It's a slow unraveling, a series of choices, crises, and global shifts converging at the same moment. For years, the Chinese miracle seemed unstoppable. The West depended on China for everything from smartphones to solar panels. Factories in Guangzhou and Shenzhen ran 24 hours a day. But beneath that glittering surface, a storm was brewing, one that few saw coming and even fewer were prepared for. It begins with debt. It's trillions of dollars in hidden local government loans, real estate speculation, and infrastructure projects that were never needed. For years, Chinese cities kept building highways with no cars, airports with no passengers, entire ghost cities waiting for residents who never arrived. It was growth on paper, prosperity in data, but an illusion in reality. And then the illusion started to crack. The real estate giant Evergrande defaulted. Confidence in the property market vanished. Millions of Chinese families whose life savings were tied up in unfinished apartments suddenly found themselves staring at empty buildings. Construction stopped. Banks began to panic. The property sector, which made up nearly 1/3 of China's GDP, began to collapse under its own weight. For the first time, the world realized that China's economic miracle was not invincible. At the same time, the global stage began to shift. The trade war with the United States, rising labor costs, and growing political tensions pushed multinational companies to reconsider their dependence on China. The idea of China Plus One was born, a new strategy to diversify manufacturing away from China. And for many of those companies, one country stood out as the natural alternative: India. India had the numbers, the talent, and the timing, with a population surpassing China's, a massive young workforce, and a democratic system increasingly aligned with Western interests. India suddenly became the world's most attractive new manufacturing hub. Apple, once synonymous with Made in China, began shifting its production lines to India. Foxconn built massive factories in Tamil Nadu. Global brands quietly started to move, creating a silent industrial revolution across India's southern and western states. But India's rise isn't just about China's fall. It's about preparation meeting opportunity. For years, India was seen as a sleeping giant, full of potential but limited by bureaucracy and infrastructure challenges. Yet, under a new wave of reforms, things began to change. Digital infrastructure expanded rapidly. The goods and services tax unified India's vast market. Policies like Make in India and production-linked incentives gave foreign investors confidence to build. Slowly, India became not just a market for global products, but a producer of them, while China faced lockdowns, capital flight, and demographic decline. India was expanding, building factories, ports, and tech corridors. The energy that once drove Shenzhen is now flowing into Bengaluru, Pune, and Hyderabad. Every month, new industrial zones are being announced and international investors are lining up. Even Vietnam, once seen as China's biggest alternative, is beginning to feel the competition. Because India isn't just offering cheap labor, it's offering scale, stability, and strategy. But to understand why this shift matters, we have to see the bigger picture. China's rise reshaped globalization. Slowdown is reshaping it again. For decades, the world's supply chains were like arteries flowing through China. When the pandemic hit and those arteries clogged, the world realized how vulnerable it had become. Suddenly, Made in China wasn't just a label, it was a risk. Companies began calculating political exposure, trade war threats, and shipping disruptions. India's promise wasn't just cost, it was security. And as global tensions rise from the South China Sea to Taiwan, corporations are choosing predictability over perfection. India's democracy, legal system, and openness to Western business make it the safer bet. This isn't just an economic transition, it's a geopolitical one. The factory of the world is moving and the global balance of power is shifting with it. Inside China, the pain runs deeper than numbers. Youth unemployment has soared to record highs. Small businesses are collapsing. Foreign investment is fleeing. The middle class, once the backbone of China's growth, is losing confidence. Even China's own companies are moving production overseas, quietly setting up operations in Southeast Asia, Mexico, and, increasingly, India. What was once China's greatest strength, its manufacturing ecosystem, is now becoming its greatest vulnerability. Meanwhile, India's momentum continues to build. In just a few years, it has become the world's fastest-growing major economy. Global CEOs are visiting New Delhi instead of Beijing. The G20 presidency gave India a platform to showcase its global ambitions. Its diplomatic strategy, balancing relations with the US, Europe, and Russia, has earned it a unique place in world politics. India is no longer following the global narrative, it's shaping it. Factories once humming in Shenzhen are now alive in Pune. Supply chains once anchored in China's coastal cities are being rebuilt across India's heartland. This is not just economic competition, it's a changing of the guard. The 21st century's manufacturing heart is beating again, but this time it beats to an Indian rhythm. Still, India's rise isn't without challenges. Power shortages, infrastructure gaps, and bureaucratic hurdles remain, but the difference today is momentum. The global system that once favored China is now shifting in India's favor. As Western governments push to de-risk from Beijing, they're offering new incentives for Indian manufacturing. Australia and the US are investing billions in supply chain partnerships with India. Every container that leaves Mumbai instead of Shanghai is a symbol of that shift. The transition is already visible from space. Satellite images show dimming lights in parts of China's manufacturing belt and new ones glowing in India's industrial zones. Trade routes are shifting, supply chains are realigning, and capital is flowing toward the subcontinent. For the first time in decades, the world is betting not on China's growth, but on India's potential. Behind the headlines and numbers lies a deeper truth. History never stops moving. The same forces that made China the world's factory are now making India its successor. As Beijing tightens control, New Delhi opens doors. As Chinese workers age, Indian youth step in. As China isolates, India connects. In boardrooms from Silicon Valley to London, decisions are being made that will define the next generation of global trade, and most of them now include India. The question is no longer if India can replace China, but how soon? And as the decade unfolds, one fact becomes clear. The future of global manufacturing no longer belongs to the Middle Kingdom, belongs to the world's largest democracy, a nation that has waited, prepared, and finally seized its moment. The dragon is slowing down. The elephant is on the move. And the world is watching the greatest economic transformation of our time.